a complicated relationship with silence. Generally, I don't like it, but I want to. I aspire to be someone who loves silence. So my rumination today is in 3 parts. I'm going to tell you 3 separate stories about silence and simultaneously talk radio. But in whole together, the separate will become one. So I grew up in a house full of people, 4 brothers, 1 sister, 2 parents, 2 dogs, 7 cats, numerous gerbils. I lost count of the gerbils. With that many cats, there were some massacres. Anyway, a lot of noise. So now I only have 1 husband and 1 cat. So to fill the void, I listen to talk radio. I am calmed by the constant purr of voices. But I worry that listening to background talking could possibly make actual communication difficult at times. Talking is a very limited form of communication, you know, but it's all we have. Where I grew up, we had one of those ladies in the neighborhood who wore tinfoil around her head. And one afternoon, she told me about the hidden messages in talk radio. She believed the radio waves were sent out to the stars, and the aliens altered them and sent them back to Earth. What we heard were hidden messages from the aliens. Okay, so here's my first terrifying story about silence. I was 13 or so, and I had been outside. I was looking up at the stars. We have stars in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I grew up. They are actually visible from the city. So I felt really small all of a sudden, looking up at all those lights, and I got a little overwhelmed. I went inside. I was alone. Everyone, all the people, all the animals, everyone was out of the house. I sat in the living room and looked out over the sea of lights that made up my little city in Utah. In every one of those lights, I knew there was someone in there, but they didn't know that me personally, was here. I felt inconsequential. So I decided to turn on all of the lights in the house to make myself bigger and brighter. I turned on the hi-fi, and I am my father's daughter. My father's constant talk radio was on. I was so frightened. The voices on the radio didn't make any sense. I mean, I knew they were speaking English, but I couldn't understand them. It was just gibberish. I was so nervous. I thought maybe it was the aliens. I turned on the TV and all the clock radios, but even with all the light and noise in the house, I didn't feel any better. And suddenly the power went out. And the silence enveloped me, smothered me. It was pitch black. I felt like I had been swallowed. I was gone in an instant. My little light in the sea of lights was out. Just as I had given up all hope of survival, my parents walked in, and my dad went downstairs and flipped the breaker, and the power came back on, and the lights and the sound were outstanding, brilliant. It was shot through my chest. I was alive. So, curiously, my parents just kind of went around the house turning off all the lights, and it was the 70s, and my dad was grumbling about how we need to conserve energy, and neither of them asked me why I had turned on all of the lights in the house. And I thought, they must think I'm like this all the time. So, years later, I moved to New York City. Here's my second story. There's a lot of noise in New York. You'd think that I would be very comfortable in New York and I would be perfect, but you can't see the stars in New York City, and that makes me nervous. So everybody just kept telling me that New York gets better. You have to stick it out like a marriage in the 50s. But for me, New York was just all about being alone in my apartment with a steam heater, sweating in the dark, listening to talk radio, trying to drown out the sex from next door. My neighbors in New York City were very loud sex people. I don't really know if it was passionate or not. I was not involved in that part of the loop, but it was very loud. So in New York, I listened, for some reason, to mostly conservative talk radio. Conservatives really are aliens, you know. I guess I was just trying to find the hidden message. I don't listen to conservative talk radio anymore. I would prefer silence to that, and we've established how I feel about silence. So I I don't like to call in to talk radio. That's just crazy. However, once upon a time in New York City, while listening to the conservative talk radio show Jay Diamond on WABC, I was compelled to call in. And the screener asks me what it is I want to talk about. I hadn't really thought about it, so I say, well, I guess I just want to talk about what an idiot Jay Diamond is. And the screener says, ha, you're next. So I'm sure Jay Diamond gets on his little prompter, Shaz, female first-time caller from Manhattan, wants to talk about what an idiot you are. I imagine on some level, to the conservative talk radio world, a caller like that is akin to the cum shot in porno. I actually know very little about either worlds, but they seemed overly excited to get me on the air. So Jay gets on the line and he says, okay, let's go to Shaz in Manhattan, if that's really your name. I don't go right into the, you're an idiot, Jay. I kind of ease into it. I ask him if he's ever seen any Nanni Moretti films. He's like, the Italian Woody Allen, Jay. I start to tell him about how in one of his films, Caro Diario, there's a radio personality on his deathbed who feels compelled to apologize to everyone he has harmed in his lifetime, which is a lot, and he's begging for forgiveness of the public. It's very dark and very funny. And I say, you really should see it, Jay. I'm sure it would hit you in ways you ought to be hit. And I think he's actually a film critic in the Nanni Moretti film, but I altered it for Jay because I wasn't sure Jay was sharp enough to make the parallel personally. So I go on this long, winding story, and I'm not upset. I'm very calm, and he's getting annoyed because I'm winning. So he says, what is your point, Shaz? I never knew my name had so many syllables. I say, I was just wondering if you feel remorse for what you do. I mean, you spread a lot of fear and hatred. And he says, what are you on, Shaz? I must be on drugs because I watch foreign films. And he asks again, what are you on? I say, nothing. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm Mormon. I am, technically. He says, oh, sure. Can you tell me about the angel Moroni? I correct him, it's pronounced Moroni. Well, this is back east. I say, well, you're still pronouncing it wrong. It's Moroni. He's not atop of pasta, he's an angel. Moroni is the man that's depicted on the gold statue on top of all Mormon temples. On Santa Monica Boulevard, that statue is going to come to life and blow that golden horn to signal the second coming. So if that ever happens, you might want to look up. As I was listening to Jay rant and rant, it started to just sound like gibberish, and I thought, he really doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, he has his own radio show, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But it's not stopping him from talking. Maybe all these people, like me, listening in the dark by themselves are all thinking the same thing, but no one wants to say anything, like the emperor's clothes. No one wants to believe that they don't know what's happening. And we're just leaving further and further away from anything rational. Talking is a limited form of communication, but it's all we have. Suddenly, I hear Jay Diamond screaming at me on the phone, and he says, I hate you, Shaz. I mean it. I really do. I hate your sniveling guts. Sniveling? Who talks like that? And he hangs up on me. And I was shocked. And then the regulars start calling in, and they keep talking about me. That was great, Jay. Would you just tell that Mormon again, girl, to shut up? Jay, you gotta keep the Mormon girls off the air. They just call in, they get you all frustrated, and they ruin the whole show. I had to wonder how many Mormon girls really actually called in, but that was the one and only time I became the talk radio. It was disconcerting and disturbing. Just as a side note, this is not one of the stories, but I read later that Jay Diamond became a lefty. He was disturbed and dissatisfied with the Bush-Cheney politics of fear-mongering and pro-wealthy corporate conservatism. Perhaps he did get my hidden message after all. All right, this is the last story. Many moons ago, I went to a powwow with my mother in Utah, and after the powwow, we drove out in the desert and set up camp, and I was really hyped up on powdered sugar and fry bread carbs. And I just kept talking and 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 talking. And my mom was trying to calm me down, and she said, Shaz, just look up. And I look up, and the stars were overwhelming, and the silence was awe-inspiring. And I leaned into my mother, and she wrapped her arms around me, and I was silent and happy. And I aspire to feel like that all the time, but I very rarely do. I have a very complicated relationship with silence.